A sharp voice cuts through the bustling sounds of an airplane cabin. "This is the final warning. Remove the bag or leave the flight." A young girl, her face flushed with embarrassment, clutches a small, well-worn leather bag to her chest. Her voice trembles as she pleads, "Please, this bag belonged to my mum. It's all I have left of her. I can't let it go." The senior flight attendant's cold expression doesn't soften. "Rules are rules, young lady. If you can't comply, you'll be removed." Gasps ripple through the other passengers. A man seated nearby stands abruptly. "This is a child. She's not causing anyone harm. Why are you doing this to her?" But the attendant's voice is sharper now, her tone brooking no argument. "Sit down, sir, or you'll be removed as well." The scene shifts to the young girl being escorted off the plane, her tear-streaked face a silent testimony to the injustice. As she stumbles into the crowded airport terminal, she collapses onto a chair, gripping the bag like it's her lifeline. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispers, her voice cracking. "Why would they do this to me?" A comforting hand rests on her shoulder. An older woman sits beside her, her eyes filled with both compassion and quiet outrage. "You didn't deserve that, sweetheart. This isn't just wrong, it's unacceptable. People need to know what happened here." From there, the story explodes. Video footage of the incident circulates online, sparking a firestorm of anger and support. The girl's voice cracks through the noise of the video. "This bag isn't just a bag. It's my mum's music, her dreams, everything she left behind. I just wanted to keep it with me." A montage of reactions follows. A father stepping out of a helicopter, his face set in steely determination. "No one humiliates my daughter and gets away with it," he declares. The flight attendant, her once certain demeanor now clouded with doubt, mutters, I didn't realize what it meant to her." And finally, the girl sits at a grand piano under a spotlight, her hands poised above the keys. The first haunting notes of a melody begin, carrying a story of love, loss, and resilience. The audience listens, tears glistening in their eyes. But who is this girl? Why did such a seemingly small incident cause such an uproar? And what will it take for justice and understanding to prevail? This story is more than an incident. It's a lesson in empathy, forgiveness, and the power of one voice to create change. Will you listen to it? What would you have done if you were in Nia's shoes, or if you had witnessed what happened to her? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know how stories like this inspire or move you. And don't miss more powerful, heartwarming stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button and join us in spreading messages of kindness, resilience, and change. Let's dive in this story. The soft, soulful melody of a piano filled the quiet morning air in a cozy suburban home in Atlanta, Georgia. Nia Johnson, a bright-eyed 14-year-old girl with an unmistakable spark of determination, sat at the polished piano in the corner of the living room. Her delicate fingers glided over the keys, playing a hauntingly beautiful tune that echoed memories of her late mother, Angela. Angela's song was not just a piece of music, it was a legacy, a treasure trove of hope and dreams she had passed on to her daughter before succumbing to cancer 3 years earlier. Nia had practiced this piece countless times, yet today felt different. Her heart swelled with a mix of pride and anxiety. Today was the day she would leave for New York to compete in an international piano recital. As the last notes of the song lingered in the air, Jordan Johnson, Nia's father, stepped into the room, his warm smile breaking the morning's stillness. Jordan was a tall, composed man in his late 30s with a businesslike demeanor, but his eyes softened whenever he looked at his daughter. "Playing your mum's piece again, huh?" Jordan asked, leaning against the doorway. Nia nodded, not looking up from the piano. "I feel like she's still here with me when I play it." Jordan walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. She is, sweetheart, and she's incredibly proud of you, just like I am. Nia finally turned to him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of excitement and apprehension. What if I mess up, Dad? What if I'm not good enough? Jordan crouched down so that he was eye level with her. Listen to me, Nia. This isn't about being perfect. It's about doing what you love and sharing it with the world. Your mom used to say, every note you play is a piece of your heart. You've got a lot of heart, kiddo. Just be yourself, and you'll shine brighter than any spotlight. Nia smiled weakly, taking in his words. Thanks, Dad. Jordan straightened up, clapping his hands together. Now, let's get you packed. New York's not going to wait forever, and neither is your flight. The family's living room was modest but full of character. Framed photos of Angela and a younger Nia adorned the walls, capturing moments of laughter and milestones. On a side table rested Angela's favorite vase, holding a fresh bouquet of lilies, her favorite flowers. In the middle of the room sat a small, well-worn leather bag. It was no ordinary bag, it was Angela's. Inside it lay a carefully folded sheet of her original composition, the very piece Nia had just played. The bag, like the music, was a symbol of her mother's enduring presence. Nia knelt beside the bag, running her fingers over the smooth leather. Do you think I'll ever be as good as Mom? Jordan, who was sorting through her travel essentials, paused and looked at her. You're already amazing, Nia. But you're not supposed to be her. You're meant to be you, and that's more than enough. As Nia carefully placed the folded sheet music into the bag, Jordan chuckled. You know, your mom always said that bag brought her luck. Maybe it'll do the same for you. Nia zipped up the bag, a newfound confidence shining in her eyes. I hope so. I want to make her proud. Jordan walked over, ruffling her curly hair. You already have. Their conversation was interrupted by the gentle chime of a reminder on Jordan's phone. All right, superstar, he said, picking up her suitcase. Let's hit the road. The big city's waiting for its next musical sensation. The drive to the airport was filled with light-hearted chatter. Jordan told stories about Angela's early days as a pianist, how she would nervously tap her fingers on any surface before every performance, and how she once broke a piano key during a particularly passionate recital. Nia laughed, picturing her mother's fiery determination. I guess that's where I get it from. Jordan grinned. Oh, absolutely. But let's not break any piano keys in New York, okay? As they pulled into the airport's drop-off area, a wave of excitement and nervousness washed over Nia. Jordan parked the car and turned to her. Nia, remember, this isn't just about the competition. This is about you doing what you love. Go out there and make some memories. Nia hugged her father tightly, feeling a mix of gratitude and resolve. Thanks for everything, Dad. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart, Jordan replied, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a hint of emotion. As Nia stepped out of the car, clutching her mother's bag, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. She was ready to face whatever awaited her. The bustling Atlanta International Airport buzzed with life, rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and announcements echoing over the intercom. Nia gripped her mother's bag tightly, her fingers running over the worn leather strap as she followed Jordan through the crowded terminal. The sheer size of the place was overwhelming, and for a moment she felt like a tiny speck in a sea of travelers. All right, Nia, Jordan said as they approached the check-in counter. I've got your ticket and ID. Just stay calm, and everything will go smoothly. Nia nodded, taking a deep breath. She handed her passport and ticket to the check-in agent, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. The woman scanned the documents, her eyes briefly flicking to Nia's bag. This bag's too big for carry-on, the agent said flatly. It needs to be checked. Nia's heart sank. She clutched the bag tighter. But it's not heavy, and it's really important to me. It holds... She hesitated, unsure if the woman would care about the sentimental value of the contents. "It holds my sheet music. I can't lose it." The agent sighed, already annoyed. "Rules are rules. Either check it or leave it behind." Jordan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, but the dimensions of that bag meet carry-on standards. I checked before we arrived." The woman raised an eyebrow, but reluctantly measured the bag. With a curt nod, she handed the ticket back to Nia. "Fine. Next time, double-check before coming to the counter." As they walked away, Nia glanced at her father, her expression a mix of relief and gratitude. "Thanks, Dad. I don't know what I'd do if I had to leave it." Jordan smiled, patting her shoulder. "You don't give up something important just because someone tells you to, Nia. That's a lesson your mum taught me a long time ago." After clearing security, they found themselves in the terminal's bustling waiting area. Jordan bought Nia a small bottle of water and a granola bar from a kiosk before sitting with her near the gate. As they waited, Nia noticed a woman sitting a few seats away, quietly reading a book. The woman, with her silver-grey hair neatly pinned back, had an air of wisdom and warmth about her. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman smiled. "First time flying?" the woman asked, closing her book. Nia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm going to New York for a piano recital."
The woman's eyes lit up with interest. "A musician? That's wonderful. I used to teach music at a high school. What piece are you playing?" Nia felt a flicker of pride. "A composition my mom wrote. She was a pianist too." The woman's expression softened. She must have been incredibly talented and brave to pass that love of music on to you. Jordan, who had been listening quietly, chimed in. Her mom was one of the most determined people I've ever known. She taught Nia to never settle for less than what she deserved. The woman smiled knowingly. A good lesson for any young person. The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, signaling that Nia's flight was ready to depart. Jordan stood, helping her with her bag. He hesitated for a moment, then knelt down to look her in the eye. "Nia, this is your moment. Whatever happens out there, just remember how proud your mom would be. You're not just representing yourself, you're carrying her dreams too. But most importantly, have fun." Nia hugged him tightly, feeling the strength of his support in the firmness of his embrace. "I'll do my best, Dad." I promised. Jordan stood and watched as Nia joined the boarding line. She turned back once, waving, and he waved back with a mixture of pride and the bittersweet ache of watching his little girl take a big step forward. As Nia boarded the plane, she couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was more than just a trip to New York. It was a bridge between her past, her present, and the future she was determined to create. The airport buzzed with frenetic energy as Nia approached the check-in counter, clutching her mother's leather bag like a lifeline. Passengers hurried by, dragging luggage and chattering on phones. For Nia, the sheer scale of it all was intimidating. She took a deep breath, summoning the confidence her dad had instilled in her that morning. At the counter stood Melissa, a middle-aged check-in agent with a sharp gaze and an air of impatience. Her uniform was crisp and her movements were methodical, but there was no warmth in her demeanor. "Next," Melissa called out curtly, not bothering to glance up as Nia stepped forward. Nia placed her ticket and passport on the counter and smiled politely. "Good morning. I'm flying to New York." Melissa finally looked up, her eyes scanning Nia before settling on the bag slung over her shoulder. Her brow furrowed. "That bag looks too large for a carry-on. You'll need to check it." Nia's heart sank. She tightened her grip on the bag's strap. "It's not heavy, and it meets the size requirements. I checked before we came." Melissa let out a short sigh, as if Nia's protest was a personal inconvenience. "I'll decide if it meets the requirements. Place it on the scale." The exchange drew the attention of a few travelers nearby. Nia hesitated but complied, carefully placing the bag on the scale. Melissa scrutinized it, her lips pursed. After a pause, she said, "Fine. It just barely makes it." Nia exhaled in relief, but Melissa wasn't finished. "Next time, read the guidelines thoroughly before you travel. We're not here to make exceptions." The sharpness in her tone made Naya's cheeks flush with embarrassment. She nodded quietly and took back her ticket and passport. As she stepped aside, she could feel the sting of judgment in Melissa's words lingering. She glanced back at her mother's bag, reminding herself of its importance. Finding her way to the waiting area, Nia scanned the crowded terminal for a seat. Most were occupied by travelers engrossed in their phones or conversations. She finally spotted a single empty chair next to an older woman with silvery hair tied neatly in a bun. The woman looked up from her book and smiled warmly as Nia sat down. "Big trip ahead?" she asked, her voice kind and inviting. Nia nodded, adjusting the bag on her lap. "I'm heading to New York for a piano recital." The woman's face lit up with interest. "A pianist? How exciting! What will you be playing?" Nia hesitated, unsure if the woman would understand the significance of her answer. But something about the warmth in her eyes encouraged honesty. "A composition my mom wrote. She passed away, but I still play her music. It feels like a way to keep her close." The woman's smile softened, her gaze filled with understanding. "That's a beautiful tribute. I'm Eleanor, by the way. I used to teach music at a high school not far from here. Over the years, I've seen so many talented young musicians. They always remind me of how powerful music can be, how it carries memories, emotions, even pieces of ourselves." Nia felt a flicker of connection. "It does. When I play her music, it's like I can hear her voice again, like she's telling me to keep going, even when it's hard." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman, and you're very brave to carry her legacy forward. You should be proud of yourself."
Nia smiled shyly, the weight of the morning's tension easing just a little. "Thank you. It's nice to talk to someone who understands." The announcement for boarding crackled over the intercom, pulling both of them from the conversation. Eleanor looked at Nia with a twinkle of encouragement in her eye. "Good luck out there, dear. I'll be rooting for you." "Thank you," Nia replied, clutching her bag tighter as she stood. "It was really nice meeting you." As Nia made her way to the boarding line, she couldn't help but glance back at Eleanor, who gave her a small wave before returning to her book. For the first time that day, Nia felt a sense of calm. Nia joined the boarding line, her mother's bag clutched tightly against her chest as the queue shuffled forward. The earlier encounter with Melissa still lingered in her mind, but the brief conversation with Eleanor had brought her some comfort. The line moved steadily as passengers handed over their tickets and headed down the jet bridge. Nia stepped forward, presenting her boarding pass to the gate agent, who gave her a polite nod and motioned her through. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the plane, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. The cabin was bustling with activity. Passengers were stowing their carry-ons, finding their seats, and settling in. Nia scanned the overhead compartments, searching for an empty spot to place her bag. As she walked down the narrow aisle, her hands tightened on the strap. Halfway to her row, a sharp voice stopped her in her tracks. "Excuse me, miss. That bag needs to go in the overhead bin, not on the floor," a flight attendant said curtly. Nia looked up, meeting the eyes of Heather, the senior flight attendant. Heather's expression was cold, her perfectly styled hair and crisp uniform accentuating her no-nonsense demeanor. "Oh, I was just looking for space," Nia said softly, trying not to draw attention. Heather sighed dramatically, her tone tinged with impatience. "If you can't manage it, I'll have to check it for you. We can't have passengers holding up the boarding process." The words stung, and Nia felt her cheeks flush. She opened a nearby compartment and gently slid the bag inside, careful not to disturb the other luggage. "See? Not so hard," Heather muttered under her breath, barely audible but cutting enough for Nia to hear. Nia found her seat by the window and sat down, her heart sinking. The excitement she had felt earlier in the day was beginning to unravel, replaced by a mix of frustration and self-doubt. She leaned her head against the cool window, staring out at the busy tarmac as ground crew moved about below. As passengers continued to board, Nia noticed a familiar face approaching. It was Eleanor, her silver hair gleaming under the cabin lights. To her surprise, Eleanor stopped at the row across from Nia and began stowing her belongings. "You again," Eleanor said with a warm smile as she settled into her seat. "Looks like we're travel companions after all." Nia's spirits lifted slightly. "Yeah, it's nice to see a friendly face." Eleanor chuckled softly, fastening her seatbelt. "I'd say the same. First-time flyers can always use a bit of reassurance. You doing okay?" Nia hesitated, glancing around as the flight attendants moved up and down the aisle. "It's a little overwhelming, and not everyone has been, well, nice." Eleanor's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly as she seemed to pick up on the undertone of Nia's words. "Airports and airplanes can bring out the worst in some people, but don't let it get to you. You've got something special, Nia. Don't let anyone dim that light." The kind words wrapped around Nia like a comforting blanket. She nodded, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. As the cabin doors closed and the safety demonstration began, Nia tried to focus on the journey ahead. She reminded herself of her father's encouragement and the reason she was making this trip. The thought of playing her mother's composition in front of a New York audience was both thrilling and terrifying. But just as she began to settle, Heather's voice echoed from the front of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for takeoff, please ensure all carry-on items are securely stowed." Her tone was clipped, devoid of the warmth typically expected from flight attendants. Nia couldn't help but feel a pang of unease as Heather's sharp eyes swept over the cabin. The earlier encounter replayed in her mind, and she found herself gripping the armrests tightly. Eleanor leaned across the aisle, her voice soft but firm. "Just breathe, Nia. Focus on the music. Everything else fades away once you do." Nia took a deep breath, letting the tension slowly drain from her shoulders. "Thanks, Eleanor. I'll try." Eleanor gave her a knowing look. "Trust me, dear. You've got more strength in you than you realize." As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Nia closed her eyes, letting Eleanor's words sink in. She pictured her mother's face, the way she used to smile whenever Nia played the piano. The roar of the engines grew louder, but within her mind, a familiar melody began to take shape, a reminder of why she was here and what she was meant to do. The plane lifted into the air, and with it, Nia's resolve grew stronger. The plane hummed softly as passengers settled into their seats. Nia sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stared out of the window. The faint glow of the setting sun reflected on the tarmac below, a fleeting moment of peace before the turbulence that was about to unfold. Heather, the senior flight attendant, strode purposefully down the aisle, her polished shoes clicking against the cabin floor. She exuded authority, but her demeanor carried an unmistakable air of superiority. As she reached Nia's row, her eyes landed on the young girl's leather bag, tucked securely beneath the seat. Heather's expression immediately soured. "Excuse me," Heather said, her voice sharp enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. "That bag needs to go in the overhead compartment." Nia blinked, startled by the sudden attention. "I thought it was okay here. It fits under the seat, and I already checked it with the gate agent." Heather crossed her arms, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It may fit, but we have policies for a reason. It's blocking the space under the seat. If there's an emergency, it could be a hazard." Nia's cheeks flushed. She leaned down, ensuring the bag was fully pushed under the seat. "I made sure it's all the way in. It's not sticking out." Heather let out a short, derisive laugh, shaking her head as though Nia's response was completely unreasonable. "That's not the point. Passengers need to follow instructions, especially young ones. We can't make exceptions just because you think you're special." The words hit Nia like a slap, and she froze, her mind racing for the right thing to say. Before she could respond, a voice from across the aisle cut through the tension. "Excuse me, but the young lady isn't doing anything wrong," said Marcus Green, a man in his 40s with a calm but firm tone. He adjusted his glasses and leaned slightly forward, his eyes meeting Heather's. "Her bag's properly stored and it's not in anyone's way." Heather turned toward him, her expression shifting into one of polite disdain. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't your row, and it's not your decision to make. Please remain seated and let me do my job." Marcus didn't back down. Doing your job doesn't mean singling out passengers without a valid reason. Heather's smile grew colder. "I'm sure you'd like to believe that, but I'm simply enforcing the rules for everyone's safety. Now, unless you'd like to file a formal complaint after the flight, I suggest you refrain from interrupting further." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Heather turned back to Nia, effectively cutting him off. By now, several passengers were watching the exchange. Nia could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their silent judgment pressing down on her chest. She wished she could disappear, to melt into her seat and avoid the growing scene. Heather's voice softened, but the condescension remained. "Listen, sweetheart, I'm trying to help you. If you can't follow instructions, I'll have to escalate this. Is that what you want?" Nia shook her head, her throat tightening with unshed tears. "No, ma'am. I just want to keep my bag here. It's really important to me." Heather sighed theatrically, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Important or not, rules are rules. If you can't comply, I'll have to involve the captain." The cabin fell into a tense silence, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Would Heather really escalate the situation over a bag? Eleanor, who had been quietly observing from across the aisle, finally spoke up. Her voice was calm, but laced with disapproval. "Excuse me, miss, but I think this situation has gone far enough. The girl isn't causing any trouble. Perhaps we could move on." Heather turned toward Eleanor, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "I appreciate your input, ma'am, but we have safety protocols to follow. It's my responsibility to ensure compliance." Eleanor held Heather's gaze, unflinching. "And it's your responsibility to treat passengers with respect, especially a child who's clearly doing her best to follow your instructions." A murmur of agreement rippled through a few nearby passengers, but Heather seemed unfazed. Her focus remained fixed on Nia, whose head was bowed as she tried to keep her emotions in check. "All right," Heather said, her voice crisp. "If we can't resolve this, I'll need to ask the young lady to step off the plane until the matter is sorted." Nia's head shot up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Step off the plane? But I didn't do anything wrong." Heather held up a hand to silence her. "I'm not going to argue about this. Either the bag goes into the checked luggage, or you'll need to disembark." Marcus stood up, his voice rising with indignation. "This is absurd. You can't force her off the plane over something so trivial." Heather's eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer to him. "Sir, sit down, or I'll have to involve security." The tension in the cabin was palpable, the once bustling plane now eerily quiet as passengers watched the confrontation unfold. Nia looked to Marcus, then Eleanor, then back to Heather, her chest tightening as panic set in. "Fine," Nia said finally, her voice trembling. I'll leave." Eleanor's hand shot up as if to protest, but Nia was already standing, clutching her bag as tears welled in her eyes. She turned and began walking toward the front of the plane, her heart pounding with humiliation. As Nia stepped off the plane, the cabin door closed behind her with a hollow thud. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged looks of disbelief, their expressions a mixture of anger and sadness. "This isn't right," Marcus muttered, shaking his head. "No," Eleanor agreed, her voice quiet but resolute. "It's not." The walk back down the jet bridge felt like the longest journey of Nia's life. The sting of humiliation burned her cheeks as she clutched her mother's bag tightly against her chest, each step echoing with the weight of what had just happened. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not where anyone could see. At the end of the jet bridge, a gate agent stood waiting, her expression neutral but impersonal. "Follow me, please," she said, gesturing toward the waiting area. Nia nodded silently, her throat too tight to respond. As she entered the brightly lit terminal, the stark contrast between its busy normalcy and the storm of emotions within her was jarring. She found an empty seat near the corner of the lounge and sank into it, her shoulders trembling as she tried to hold herself together. Back on the plane, the cabin buzzed with murmurs. Passengers exchanged looks of disbelief and whispered among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Marcus remained standing, his fists clenched at his sides as he glared down the aisle toward Heather. "This is wrong," he said aloud, his voice cutting through the low chatter. "I don't care what policies you're following. That was completely unnecessary." Heather turned to face him, her expression a mix of irritation and authority. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but I need you to sit down. We're preparing for takeoff." Marcus didn't budge. Upset doesn't begin to cover it. That was discrimination, plain and simple. You didn't just enforce a rule. You made a child feel like she didn't belong here. Heather's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "If you have a complaint, I suggest you take it up with customer service after the flight. Right now, I need to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers." Eleanor, who had been quietly watching, stood up as well. Her movements were deliberate, her presence commanding despite her petite frame. "You want to talk about comfort? Because I can assure you that what just happened made a lot of people here very uncomfortable, including me." Several heads nodded in agreement, and a few voices murmured their support. Heather's composure began to crack under the growing pressure, but she held firm. "This discussion is over," she said curtly, turning on her heel and walking briskly toward the front of the plane. Meanwhile, Nia sat hunched over in the terminal, staring at the floor as her tears finally spilled over. She hated how powerless she felt, how unfair it all was. The bag on her lap felt heavier than ever, a reminder of her mother's legacy and the dreams she had worked so hard to honor. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I sit with you?" Nia looked up to see Eleanor standing nearby, her face kind but tinged with sadness. Nia nodded, wiping her cheeks quickly. Eleanor lowered herself into the seat beside Nia, setting her purse on the floor. For a moment she didn't say anything, letting the silence stretch between them. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "You didn't deserve that, Nia. None of it." Nia's throat tightened and she shook her head. "It doesn't matter. She didn't care. No one cares." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "That's not true. I care. That man who stood up for you cares. And I know your father cares more than anything." At the mention of her dad, Nia's chest ached. "I just wanted to make him proud, and my mum too. But now..." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Eleanor reached out, placing a comforting hand on Nia's shoulder. "You already make them proud, just by being you. Don't let one person's ignorance take that away from you." "Nia," he said, crouching down to meet her gaze, "I wanted to make sure you're okay. What happened back there wasn't right." Nia blinked, surprised to see him. "You came off the plane?" Marcus nodded. "I couldn't sit there and let them treat you like that. Someone needs to stand up when things aren't fair." Eleanor smiled softly. "It seems like we've got a small team of fighters here." Nia glanced between them, her tears subsiding as a flicker of hope began to replace her despair. "Thank you. Both of you." As the three sat together, Eleanor pulled out her phone. I'm going to make sure more people know about this. People need to see what happened here. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're going to post about it? Eleanor nodded, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Absolutely. The world needs to hear her story. Marcus smiled faintly. Count me in. I'll share it too. This isn't just about one flight. It's about standing up for what's right. Naya watched them, a sense of solidarity beginning to take root. For the first time since stepping off the plane, she felt seen, heard, and supported. As Eleanor hit post, her caption read, "This young girl was humiliated and removed from her flight for no reason other than one person's bias. Let's make sure this doesn't go unnoticed." The photo accompanying the post showed Nia sitting with her bag, her eyes filled with resilience despite the tears. Within minutes, notifications began pouring in, and Eleanor's phone buzzed with messages of outrage and support. Nia watched in awe as people from around the world began commenting. Strangers offering words of encouragement, sharing similar stories, and calling for accountability. "See?" Eleanor said, turning the phone to show Nia. "You're not alone in this." The cold, sterile light of the terminal reflected off the polished floors, creating a stark contrast to the warmth and hope Nia had felt earlier that day. She sat on a hard plastic chair, her mother's leather bag resting on her lap like a fragile shield against the storm of emotions swirling within her. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone. The screen lit up, and she stared at it for a moment, hesitating. She didn't want to call her dad, not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't want him to hear the crack in her voice or the tears threatening to spill over. Taking a deep breath, Naya tapped his number. The phone rang twice before Jordan's deep, steady voice answered. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, the sound of his voice instantly soothing but laced with curiosity. "How's everything going? Are you all settled on the plane?" Nia's lips quivered, and she pressed them together, trying to keep herself composed. But the weight of the humiliation, the stares of the passengers, and Heather's cold dismissal came crashing down all at once. "Dad!" she began, her voice breaking. Jordan immediately picked up on her tone. "Nia, what's wrong? Are you okay?" She couldn't hold it back anymore. The words tumbled out, broken by sniffles and shallow breaths. They made me get off the plane. The flight attendant. She said my bag was a problem, but I wasn't doing anything wrong. She said I had to leave." Her voice trailed off as she choked on a sob. Jordan's tone shifted, his calm exterior giving way to a protective edge. "They made you get off the plane. Why? What exactly happened?" Nia tried to explain, recounting the exchange with Heather and how she had tried to comply, only to be singled out and humiliated. The more she spoke, the more her frustration and sadness poured out. "It wasn't fair, Dad," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything wrong." Jordan's silence on the other end was heavy, but not with indecision. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, filled with a quiet determination that Nia recognized all too well. "Stay right where you are," he said. "I'm coming to get you." "But Dad, No buts, Nia," he interrupted gently but firmly. "This is unacceptable. Nobody treats my daughter like that. I'll be there as fast as I can." Nia nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Okay. And Nia," Jordan added, his voice softening, "I'm proud of you. None of this is your fault. You hear me?" A tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "I hear you." As she ended the call, Nia felt a hand gently rest on her shoulder. She turned to see Eleanor, her kind eyes filled with concern. "I couldn't help but overhear," Eleanor said softly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Nia shook her head, her composure crumbling once more. "Number, I'm not." Eleanor sat down beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but giving Nia the space to speak if she wanted to. "It's okay to be upset," she said. "What happened to you wasn't right." Nia looked down at her hands, gripping the strap of her mother's bag. I don't get it. Why was she so mean to me? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just wanted to keep my mum's bag with me. It's all I have left of her." Eleanor's heart ached at the pain in Nia's voice. She placed a hand over Nia's, her touch light but reassuring. "Some people let their own biases cloud their judgment. It doesn't make it right, but it happens far too often. I've seen it many times before." Nia glanced at her, her curiosity piqued. "You have?" Eleanor nodded, her gaze distant, as if recalling memories from another time. "I used to teach at a high school. Music, actually. I had some of the most talented students you could imagine. But many of them faced challenges that had nothing to do with their abilities. They were judged because of the color of their skin, their background, or even just the way they spoke." Nia listened intently, drawn into Eleanor's story. "What did you do?" Eleanor sighed, her expression tinged with regret. "Sometimes I could help. I'd stand up for them, remind others of their worth. But other times, I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. It's something I still carry with me, even now." She turned to Nia, her eyes shining with resolve. "But this time, I'm not staying quiet. What happened to you today is something people need to see, and I'm going to make sure they do." Before Nia could respond, Eleanor pulled out her phone and opened the camera. "May I take a picture of you?" Eleanor asked gently. "I won't post it unless you're okay with it, but I think your story could help others." Nia hesitated, unsure. She looked down at her bag, then back at Eleanor. There was something in the older woman's eyes, a quiet determination that made Nia feel safe. "Okay," she said softly. Eleanor smiled reassuringly. "Just be yourself, Nia. That's all you need to do." She took a quick photo, capturing the mix of strength and vulnerability in Nia's expression. Then, with careful words, she crafted a post. "Today, I saw something that broke my heart. A young girl, full of talent and promise, was removed from her flight for no reason other than one person's prejudice. This is not okay. We must do better." Eleanor hit post, her hand steady as the message went live. She turned to Nia and placed her phone back in her bag. "Now we wait." Within minutes, Eleanor's phone began to buzz with notifications. Comments, likes, and shares poured in as her post gained traction. People from all over chimed in with messages of support, outrage, and calls for action. Nia watched in amazement, her sadness momentarily overshadowed by the sheer volume of kindness pouring through Eleanor's screen. "See?" Eleanor said with a gentle smile. "You're not alone in this, Nia. There are people who care, people who will stand with you." Nia nodded, her chest feeling a little lighter. For the first time since she left the plane, she felt a flicker of hope. As Eleanor's post continued to spread like wildfire, she and Nia sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of the situation settle. The airport around them bustled with activity. Announcements echoed over the speakers, travelers rushed to their gates, and luggage wheels rolled rhythmically against the tiled floor. Yet, for Nia, the world seemed distant and blurred. Eleanor, sensing the girl's inner turmoil, reached out gently. "Tell me about your mum," she said. "What was she like?" Nia blinked, momentarily surprised by the question. But as she thought about her mother, a small, wistful smile crossed her face. "She was amazing. She was strong and kind and so talented. She could play anything on the piano, classical, jazz, even songs she made up on the spot. She always said music was her way of speaking when words weren't enough." Eleanor nodded, her expression soft. "She sounds extraordinary." Nia's fingers traced the edge of her mother's bag. "She used to tell me that music wasn't just something you hear, it's something you feel. She taught me how to put my heart into every note, How to make people feel something when I play. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. And how does it make you feel? Nia paused, her gaze distant. Like she's still with me. Like I can hold on to her, even though she's gone. Her voice grew quieter. That's why this bag means so much to me. It's not just a bag, it's a piece of her. Eleanor placed a comforting hand on Nia's arm. And that's why what happened on that plane was so wrong. No one had the right to make you feel like your feelings didn't matter. Across the terminal, Marcus appeared, his determined stride cutting through the sea of travelers. He carried his own duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his expression a mix of concern and purpose. Spotting Eleanor and Nia, he made his way over, his brow furrowing as he noticed the tear-streaked face of the young girl. "Hey," he said, crouching slightly to meet Nia's eye level. "You hanging in there?"
Nia gave a small nod, though her eyes still carried the weight of what had happened. "Yeah, I guess." Marcus set his bag down and took a seat next to her. "I wanted to check on you. What they did back there wasn't okay, and I wasn't about to sit through a flight pretending it was." Nia looked at him, a spark of gratitude breaking through her sadness. "You got off the plane too?" "Of course I did," Marcus said with a shrug. "Some things are more important than making it to where I'm going on time, like standing up for what's right." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's what I was telling her. When we see something wrong, it's our duty to speak up. Silence only lets these things continue." Marcus leaned back slightly, glancing at Eleanor's phone, which buzzed with another flurry of notifications. "Looks like you're making some noise already." Eleanor smiled faintly. "The world needs to hear her story. It's the least I can do." Meanwhile, Jordan was speeding toward the airport. He had wasted no time after Nia's call, booking a private car service to ensure he could reach her as quickly as possible. His mind raced with a mixture of anger and resolve. He had spent years teaching his daughter to stand tall, to never let anyone make her feel less than she was worth. Yet here she was, hurt and humiliated by a system that should have protected her. When the car pulled up to the terminal, Jordan didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He stepped out with purpose, scanning the crowd for any sign of his daughter. It didn't take long for him to spot her. She was sitting with two strangers, a silver-haired woman and a tall man with a calm but serious demeanor. But Jordan's focus was solely on Nia. "Nia!" he called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the terminal. Nia's head shot up, and the moment she saw him, the dam broke. She leapt from her seat, her mother's bag still clutched in her hands, and ran into his arms. Jordan wrapped her in a firm, protective embrace, his hand cradling the back of her head. "I've got you, baby," he murmured. "I'm here." For a moment, the rest of the world fell away. Nia buried her face in his chest, letting out the tears she had been holding back. Jordan held her tightly, his jaw clenched as he fought to keep his own emotions in check. Eleanor and Marcus watched quietly, giving them space but feeling the powerful weight of the moment. Finally, Jordan looked up, his gaze landing on the two strangers who had stayed by Nia's side. "I'm Jordan," he said, his voice steady but grateful. "Thank you for being here with her." Eleanor stood, extending a hand. "I'm Eleanor, and this is Marcus. We couldn't just walk away after what happened. Your daughter is an incredible young lady." Jordan shook their hands firmly. "She gets it from her mom," he said, his voice softening. "But what exactly happened here?" She tried to explain, but I need to know everything. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged a look before Eleanor spoke. It was the flight attendant. She singled Nia out over something as small as a bag. But it wasn't just about the bag. It was the way she treated her. Like she didn't belong there. Like she wasn't worth the respect every passenger deserves. Marcus nodded in agreement. And when some of us tried to speak up, she doubled down. It was blatant discrimination. Jordan's expression darkened, his protective instincts flaring. "This isn't going to stand. I'll make sure of that." Eleanor gestured to her phone. "I've already posted about it. People are responding, sharing it, commenting, demanding accountability. This kind of behavior can't be swept under the rug." Jordan nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. Both of you. I won't let this go either. Nia deserves better than this. Every kid does." As the terminal bustled on around them, the small group stood together, united by the injustice they had witnessed and the resolve to make it right. For the first time since stepping off the plane, Nia felt the strength of the people around her lifting her up, and deep inside, a flicker of hope began to burn brighter. The rhythmic hum of the helicopter blades echoed through the sky, a sharp contrast to the chaos Nia had endured earlier. Jordan sat inside the sleek cabin, his face a mask of determination. From the moment he had spoken to his daughter, he knew this wasn't just about her. It was about standing up against a system that allowed such treatment to happen. The helicopter descended toward a private landing area adjacent to the airport. The noise of the blades caught the attention of nearby onlookers as Jordan stepped out, his tall frame exuding authority. Dressed in a tailored suit that seemed as unyielding as his resolve, he wasted no time. A black sedan was already waiting for him, its driver holding the door open. Jordan slid into the back seat, his focus unwavering. "Take me to the airline's office. I need to speak with someone in charge, now."
The driver nodded, and the car sped toward the terminal. As it approached the building, Jordan's phone buzzed. It was one of his assistants. "Mr. Johnson," the voice on the other end said, "the video has gone viral. Thousands of people are commenting, tagging the airline, demanding answers." "Good," Jordan replied curtly. "Keep me updated. I'll handle it from here." The car pulled up to the VIP entrance of the airport. Jordan stepped out, his presence commanding immediate attention from the staff nearby. With long, purposeful strides, he made his way to the airline's administrative offices. Inside, Diane Campbell, the airline's regional director, was already aware of the situation. A poised woman in her early 50s, Diane had built her career on managing crises, but this one was spiraling out of control faster than she anticipated. Her assistant entered the office looking flustered. "Ms. Campbell, Jordan Johnson is here. He's demanding to speak with you." Diane nodded, her expression unreadable. "Show him in." Jordan entered the office, his presence filling the room. Diane extended a hand, her professional demeanor intact. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming. I understand you're upset, and I want to assure you that we're taking this matter seriously." Jordan didn't take her hand. Instead, he fixed her with a steely gaze. "Upset doesn't begin to cover it, Ms. Campbell. My 14-year-old daughter was humiliated and removed from one of your flights for no valid reason. I want to know what your airline is going to do about it." Diane motioned for him to sit, but Jordan remained standing. Realizing his stance wasn't going to soften, she sat instead, folding her hands on the desk. "Mr. Johnson, let me start by apologizing for what happened to your daughter. We are conducting a full investigation into the incident, and I assure you that appropriate actions will be taken against any staff member found at fault." Jordan's jaw tightened. "That's not enough. Investigations take time, and in the meantime, my daughter has been publicly humiliated and emotionally scarred. You're not just dealing with a customer here, you're dealing with a father who will do whatever it takes to protect his child." Diane nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "I can't undo what happened, but I can promise swift action. The flight attendant in question has been temporarily suspended while we gather all the facts. Additionally, I'd like to personally meet with your daughter to offer a formal apology." Jordan narrowed his eyes. "And what about the systemic issue? This isn't just about one employee, it's about the culture that allowed this to happen in the first place." Diane hesitated. "You're right, and we're committed to addressing that. I'll be recommending mandatory sensitivity training for all our staff to ensure this doesn't happen again." Jordan leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "Words are easy, Ms. Campbell. I'll be watching to see if your actions back them up, because if they don't, I'll make sure the whole world knows." While the confrontation unfolded in Diane's office, Eleanor's post continued to gain traction online. The video had already amassed tens of thousands of views, and the comments section was a whirlwind of outrage and solidarity. "This is appalling," one user wrote. How can something like this still happen in 2024? I stand with Nia, another commented. This behavior is unacceptable. The airline needs to be held accountable. Even celebrities and public figures began chiming in, amplifying the message. Hashtags like #Justice for Nia and #End Discrimination now started trending across platforms. Eleanor refreshed her phone, watching as the number of shares climbed by the second. She glanced at Marcus, who was leaning against a nearby wall, scrolling through his own phone. "People are listening," she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. Marcus nodded. "Good. They need to. This isn't just about one incident. It's about setting a precedent." Back in the office, Diane's phone buzzed repeatedly, the notifications piling up faster than she could address them. She glanced at the screen, her professional calm slipping for a brief moment. Jordan noticed. "That's the sound of accountability knocking on your door, Ms. Campbell. Are you ready to answer it?" Diane met his gaze, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We're addressing it, Mr. Johnson. I'll be issuing a public statement within the hour." Jordan straightened, his expression unyielding. "Make sure it's the right one." As Diane Campbell composed herself behind her desk, the gravity of the situation sank deeper into her mind. The storm brewing online was unlike anything the airline had faced before. Her inbox was flooded with media inquiries, and her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with calls from corporate. Jordan's eyes never left her as she took a moment to respond to a message. "If you're looking for damage control advice, Ms. Campbell," he said coldly, "let me save you some time. The only thing the public wants to see is accountability and real change. Nothing else will suffice." Diane set her phone down, leaning forward slightly. "Mr. Johnson, you're absolutely right. This is a pivotal moment, and we intend to handle it with the seriousness it demands. I assure you, our statement will address the actions we're taking to rectify this and prevent it from happening again." Jordan crossed his arms. "I hope you understand that this isn't just about issuing a carefully worded apology. This is about systemic failure. The world is watching, and I won't allow this to be swept under the rug." Diane nodded. "Understood. And if you're open to it, I'd like to involve you in our efforts to reshape our policies moving forward. Someone with your perspective could help ensure we make meaningful changes." Jordan arched an eyebrow, his expression skeptical but thoughtful. "That's something we can discuss after I see action." Outside the office, Eleanor and Marcus continued to monitor the rapidly escalating response to the viral post. The hashtag #Justice for Nia had reached the top of trending lists, and a few influential figures were now sharing the story with their millions of followers. "Look at this," Eleanor said, tilting her phone toward Marcus. A renowned civil rights activist had retweeted her post, adding their own comment. "This is exactly why we must continue to fight. Thank you, Eleanor, for shedding light on this injustice. We stand with Nia." Marcus gave a small nod of approval. "It's gaining traction faster than I expected. That's good. It means more pressure on the airline to act." Eleanor sighed, her expression softening as she glanced toward Nia, who was seated nearby with her father's arm around her. "I just hope it helps her feel a little less alone in all this." Marcus followed her gaze, his brow furrowing slightly. "It will. She's got people standing with her now, and she's stronger than she looks." Back in the administrative office, Diane's assistant entered the room, holding a tablet displaying the latest analytics on the post's reach. "Ms. Campbell, the video has been viewed over 2 million times in the past hour. The comments are overwhelmingly critical, and several media outlets are already reporting on it." Diane pressed her lips into a thin line, then turned to Jordan. "Mr. Johnson, I'd like to extend an invitation for you and your daughter to participate in a press conference. We want to publicly acknowledge what happened and the steps we're taking to ensure this never happens again." Jordan considered her words, his expression measured. My daughter's been through enough today. She doesn't need to stand in front of cameras and relive this. If you want to make a statement, you can do it without putting her in the spotlight again. Diane nodded, her tone conciliatory. Of course, we'll respect her privacy, but I'd like to work with you to ensure our message is clear and transparent. Jordan's jaw tightened. You'll hear from me after I've spoken to my daughter. Right now, my priority is making sure she's okay. As Jordan exited the office, he found Eleanor and Marcus waiting nearby. They both stood as he approached, their expressions expectant. Well? Eleanor asked. They're starting to feel the heat, Jordan replied, his tone firm but controlled. The video you posted is making an impact. Thank you for that. Eleanor gave a modest smile. I just did what I could. The real power is in the people responding to it. Marcus gestured toward Nia, who was watching the commotion around her with wide eyes. How's she holding up? Jordan glanced at his daughter, his expression softening. She's strong, but no kid should have to be this strong just to get through a day. Eleanor stepped closer. If there's anything more we can do, just say the word. Jordan nodded appreciatively. For now, keep the story alive. The more people know, the harder it'll be for them to brush this under the rug. The airport was now a hive of activity, with reporters beginning to gather after catching wind of the viral story. Nia watched from a distance, her father shielding her from the growing attention. She clutched her mother's bag tightly, drawing strength from the connection it represented. Dad, she said quietly, looking up at him. Do you think this will really change anything? Jordan crouched down to meet her eye level. It already has, Nia. Sometimes change starts small, with one voice, one story. But when enough people listen, it becomes something bigger, something no one can ignore. Nia's gaze flicked toward Eleanor and Marcus, then back to her father. Do you think Mom would be proud? Jordan smiled, his voice steady but full of emotion. She'd be more than proud, sweetheart. She'd be amazed at how brave you are. Nia leaned into him, letting his words wash over her like a balm. For the first time that day, she felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lift. In the hours that followed, the airline released its official statement, acknowledging the incident and promising a thorough investigation. While some applauded the quick response, others demanded more: accountability, policy changes, and tangible proof of action. Eleanor's phone buzzed again, this time with a direct message from a prominent journalist requesting an interview. She glanced at Jordan, silently seeking his input. Let's keep the focus where it belongs, he said, on Nia's story and what it represents. If we stay united, we can turn this into something meaningful. Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Heather sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the tablet in front of her. The screen glowed with the now viral video of Nia's tear-streaked face and Eleanor's calm but damning narration. The video had amassed millions of views, with comments flooding in faster than Heather could read them. This is disgusting behavior. She deserves to be fired immediately. How can a professional treat a child like this? Shameful. We need accountability, not excuses. Each comment felt like a stone thrown directly at Heather. She had prided herself on her professionalism throughout her career, but now she was the face of everything the public was condemning. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a co-worker. Co-worker. Heather, you need to stay off social media. It's getting worse. They've named you in the press. Heather groaned, running a hand through her perfectly styled blonde hair, which now hung loose in disarray. The airline had suspended her pending an investigation. The email had arrived that morning, cold and to the point, stripping her of the authority she had once held so tightly. You're the senior flight attendant, she muttered to herself, her voice thick with bitterness. You enforce the rules. That's your job." But the words rang hollow, even in the solitude of her own home. Hours passed, and Heather couldn't escape the growing weight of what had happened. She had spent most of her career priding herself on being firm but fair, keeping order in the chaos of air travel. But now, her actions, or lack of compassion, had become the catalyst for a firestorm of criticism. The tablet in front of her buzzed as a new notification appeared. Nia's piano recital, live. Heather hesitated, her finger hovering over the notification. Part of her wanted to dismiss it, to turn off the device and drown out the noise. But something kept her hand steady. Finally, with a deep breath, she tapped the screen. The live stream began. The camera focused on Nia, sitting at a grand piano in an elegant concert hall. She looked small, but determined, her mother's leather bag resting beside her on the floor. The audience fell silent as Nia placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of the piece rang out, soft and delicate, each one dripping with emotion. Heather's breath caught in her throat as the melody unfolded. As the music filled the room, Heather found herself transported to another time. Memories of her own childhood surfaced, unbidden. She was 8 years old, sitting in her mother's lap. Her mother, a patient and warm woman with a love for music, was teaching her how to play a simple tune on the piano. "Music is more than notes, Heather," her mother had said, her voice gentle. "It's about telling a story, sharing a piece of your heart with the world." Heather had nodded, her small fingers pressing clumsily on the keys. She remembered how her mother had smiled, encouraging her despite the mistakes. But the memory shifted, darkening. Heather's mother had passed away a few years later, leaving a hole in her life that nothing seemed to fill. Over the years, Heather had built walls around herself, trading compassion for control, kindness for efficiency. Now, as she watched Nia play, those walls began to crumble. The piece grew more powerful, the notes flowing with a mixture of sadness and hope. Nia's small frame seemed to carry the weight of the emotions behind the music. The audience was transfixed, and so was Heather. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized what she had done. She hadn't just enforced a rule, she had dismissed a child, a dream, and a legacy without a second thought. For the first time since the incident, Heather allowed herself to truly reflect. Her actions hadn't been about safety or protocol. They had been about power, about maintaining authority at the expense of someone else's humanity. The final note of Nia's performance rang out, lingering in the air like a whispered promise. The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Heather's tears fell freely now. She reached for her phone and opened the airline's official statement, reading it with fresh eyes. The words felt impersonal, distant, nothing like the raw emotion she had just witnessed in Nia's performance. She knew what she needed to do. That evening, Heather sat at her desk, pen in hand. The letter she was writing was addressed to Nia, but it felt like it was meant for herself as well. "Dear Nia, I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for the way I treated you. My actions were wrong, and I know I caused you pain. Watching your performance tonight reminded me of something my own mother once told me, that music is about sharing your heart. You shared yours with the world, and it was beautiful. I let my own biases and need for control blind me to what was right. I dismissed you when I should have supported you. For that, I am truly sorry. I'm committed to learning from this and making sure I never make someone feel the way I made you feel. Thank you for your bravery and your music. You've inspired me to be better. Sincerely, Heather." She folded the letter carefully, placing it in an envelope. The next morning, Heather walked into the airline's headquarters. She handed the letter to Diane Campbell, who looked at her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "It's for Nia," Heather said simply. Please make sure she gets it." Diane nodded, taking the envelope. "You know, Heather, the hardest part of leadership isn't enforcing rules. It's knowing when you've made a mistake and doing everything you can to fix it." Heather met her gaze, a flicker of determination returning to her eyes. "I'm trying." Later that week, Nia received the letter. As she read it, her brow furrowed and her lips pressed together in thought. When she finished, she handed it to her father, who read it silently. "What do you think, Dad?" Nia asked. Jordan looked at her, his face unreadable at first. Then, with a small nod, he said, "I think it's a start." Nia glanced back at the letter, the weight of Heather's words settling over her. "Me too," she said softly. For the first time in days, Nia felt a strange but welcome sense of closure. The lights in the grand concert hall dimmed, casting a warm glow over the polished stage. A hush fell over the audience, their whispers fading into an anticipatory silence. Nia stood backstage, clutching her mother's leather bag. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady the nerves swirling inside her. Jordan crouched down beside her, his steady hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, Nia. Just like we practiced. One note at a time. Let the music speak for you." She nodded, her grip on the bag loosening as her father's words grounded her. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. As her name was announced, the crowd erupted into polite applause. Nia stepped onto the stage, her small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the piano at its center. She paused for a moment, scanning the sea of faces before her, her eyes landing briefly on Eleanor and Marcus, seated near the front. Eleanor gave her an encouraging smile and a small wave. Nia walked to the piano, her shoes softly tapping against the stage floor. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered above the keys. The hall was so quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, as though testing the waters. But as the melody unfolded, Nia's confidence grew. Her fingers danced over the keys, weaving a tapestry of sound that was both delicate and powerful. The composition was her mother's, a piece that spoke of love, loss, and resilience. Each note carried a part of Angela's story, and Nia poured her heart into every measure. The audience was spellbound, their eyes fixed on the young girl who seemed to transform before them. Eleanor felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as she watched. She had seen many performances in her lifetime, but this one was different. This wasn't just a recital, it was a message, a bridge connecting the past and the present. "She's incredible," Marcus whispered beside her. Eleanor nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "She's more than that. She's brave." As the piece reached its crescendo, the emotions in the room swelled. The music carried a bittersweet ache, but also an unyielding strength. Nia's hands moved with a grace that belied her age, her expression serene yet deeply focused. The final note hung in the air, resonating through the hall like a whispered prayer. For a moment, there was silence. Then, as if on cue, the audience erupted into applause. The ovation was thunderous, the sound echoing off the walls. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Nia looked out at the sea of faces, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. She stood and gave a small bow, her cheeks flushed. As she turned to leave the stage, her eyes met Eleanor's once more. The older woman mouthed the words, "Well done." Backstage, Jordan embraced Nia tightly. "You were incredible, sweetheart," he said with pride. "I did it, Dad. I really did," Nia whispered, her smile lighting up her tear-filled eyes. "You didn't just do it. You shined. Your mum would be so proud," Jordan replied, glancing at the leather bag she held close, a symbol of her strength and their shared journey. After the concert, Eleanor approached, her face glowing with admiration. "Nia, you didn't just play music tonight. You shared a piece of your soul. It was unforgettable. Thank you, Nia said softly, humbled by the praise. Jordan shook Eleanor and Marcus's hands firmly. You stood by us when it mattered most. That means everything. Eleanor smiled. Nia showed us all what resilience looks like. Supporting her was the right thing to do. As Nia and her father stepped into the crisp New York night, she looked up at the stars. Mom always said music could change the world. Do you think she was right? Jordan placed a hand on her shoulder. She was, and you proved it tonight. Nia's smile widened as they walked into the future, her mother's bag swinging gently by her side, carrying a melody of hope.